Mr. Gbenga to come forward.
Could you help me? I mean, if it's possible, just turn it.
Showing.
May I start off by thanking the panel for having me. And I also thank everyone for being here today and listening to my presentation, which will be an adoption of just a minute, please. Which will be an adoption of a brief that has been submitted earlier to the UPT. I crave your indulgence to ask if you have a brief of our arguments. So thank you very much. My contribution to this honorable panel event is a brief of arguments against the United Kingdom as an example of a leading Western state that has contributed to the labor migrations and irregular labor migrations we see in the world today as a result of its practices in the international commercial world, particularly in investment practices and investment law. So if my arguments sound quite specific, they are designed to be so because they are coming at the problem from the perspective of trying to show that the United Kingdom particularly has contributed to the labor migration problems we see, and indeed the human migration problem we see as a result of specific acts of delict and specific acts of that show a bit of deliberate departure from the rules of public international law and what is expected of nations in international committee and in terms of international cooperation. So we will be submitting at the end that as a result of this acts of deliction, the United Kingdom has to provide a remedy, and we'll be asking for remedies in terms of asking the tribunal to insist and grant our wishes that these acts from henceforth stop and that we demand compensation and reparation for the harm so far done from a legal point of view. So our submission is to link the problem of refugees, asylum seekers, and irregular migration, as well as labor migrants who are forced to flee the Republic of Nigeria, particularly after decades of corporate corruption introduced and deliberate economic exploitation introduced by Western states and by the United Kingdom in particular. We will be trying to show that the majority of migrants you see in the UK today from Africa, and particularly from Nigeria, which is quite a lot. Our statistics show that Nigeria is a leading contributor to the migrant problem in every way you're looking at it, whether it's human trafficking or genuine labor migration. That these people flee economic and social oppression, which is deliberately and indeliberately caused by the UK. And the grounds we are relying on is that out of 6, as a result of 6 factors, the UK has contributed to this problem. The first one is that by investing, by UK councils, UK local councils, investing in arms and ammunition industry and the production of small arms and the production of munitions of all description without any knowledge to the people, there has been an oversupply of dangerous arms to the third world and indeed to Nigeria. Hence we are going through this period of Boko Haram And a ragtag army is having at its fingertips the latest weapons that were produced without any care as to where they will end up and as to who will be using them and as to what purposes. Two, that there are abusive trade practices engaged in by UK companies and multinational corporations, including trade misinvoicing, by which the profits that should go to developing countries like Nigeria disappear in non-payment of taxes, in practices whereby taxes that should be paid end up in Cayman Islands and all kinds of natural appendages to the financial jurisdiction of the UK. That by promoting white elephant and unviable projects in Nigeria, as in other parts of the developing world, the building of dams that have no sustainable environmental defense behind them, the building of stadia, the building of airports unnecessarily. White elephant projects and unviable projects are the favorite tool of economic hitmen who visit Nigeria and other parts of the developing world on a more systematic and very successful basis. And this is one of the great harm that is being done by the UK to Nigeria and other parts of the developing world. We also want to highlight that grant corruption has been used as a weapon of choice. Introduction of grant corruption, which is the corruption that afflicts the political class of developing nations, introducing them to huge gifts and monies that will be paid into accounts in bribes, and we will be calling on evidence and showing one particular scandal, OPL 245. OPL 245, if I may note, is an ongoing scandal which shows the problem we are facing in the developing world and in Nigeria today. In OPL 245, Shell decided to get the most lucrative oil block that Nigeria has, the Malabu oil field, and by paying $1.1 billion into the account of a private individual who happened to be the ex-minister of petroleum of Nigeria. Shell for 6 years denied this deliberate act of bribery, but due to the diligent work of the NGOs and civil society, some of whom are here today, we are able to know for sure that Shell knew that they were paying this amount as a bribe and that they were paying it to get a lucrative oil field for about a third or less of its original price. So we are moving to show that this is an act of terrorism, that this is an act of unfriendliness, and as a result, we are trying through this tribunal today to show that this is the reason why the health industry, if you want to call it, of Nigeria has collapsed, and anyone in the middle classes and upwards who wants to have any chance of treatment is traveling to the UK today for health services. That this is the reason why there are 23,000 Nigerian students in the UK, because the education industry has collapsed in Nigeria. This is also the reason why anyone who graduates as a doctor quickly or nurse quickly finds his way to the UK because the industries have collapsed. $1.1 billion paid into the account of Adoke in the Malabu scandal is the equivalent, in fact it is $100,000 more than the highest Nigeria has dedicated to its health budget in history. And that's the budget for last year, 2017, was $1 billion equivalent. So, and that's the amount that was withdrawn from the Nigerian people and paid into a private account, which ended up in the UK account actually. And out of that money, even after the scandal, only about $100,000 has returned to Nigeria. And out of this $100,000 that has returned to Nigeria, the London Metropolitan Police has taken some money out as handling charges. In view of all this, and in view of the fact that we don't have time to put our entire brief out in oral testimony. We are moving that the tribunal, under the principles of public international law, declare that the UK has been in violation of the basic obligations of international law under Declaration of Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, in accordance with the Charter of the UN, United Nations, 1917. We are moving that this has been, we are saying that there has been a violation of this treaty, and we are also asking that as a result of this wrongful act, and as a result of a principle, a very important principle of public international law, that when a state has been in wrongful conduct, it has a duty to desist from doing so. We're asking this tribunal to ask the UK to desist from any of all these aforementioned and arguments we have contained in the brief, to stop doing so. And also, we are seeking further damages on behalf of the Nigerian government, which will be forwarded to the tribunal as when required. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We won't have time for questions. I would like to ask the next speaker, next evidence to come forward. Janet?
Okay, hi. My name's... Somebody's waving? They're not waving at me. No, you're not waving at me. Do you want to ask a question?
No, sorry, no question.
No, sorry, we have received a lot of requests actually to ask questions, but unfortunately this is a trial and not an open forum, so in that aspect the questions will be coming from the juries and not from the public.
Okay, Janet.
Okay, all right. My name is Janet McLeod. I'm an organiser with Unite the Union, and we've given a submission as an expert witness based on the last 10 years of organising within the hospitality sector, which we would describe as UK hospitality sector, hotels, restaurants, bars and contract catering. And just to be clear, we're Unite the Union. We are the largest trade union in the UK with 1.3 million members, and we have members in all throughout this sector. Myself, I'm going to base this testimony on work done exclusively within the hotel sector and more particularly within London. And what I want to show is that the violation of workers' rights with impunity is also the violation of workers' rights with the absolute understanding and collusion of multinational companies who build within their structures the denial of union activity, union organising and union membership. So I'm going to give you some facts and then I'll talk very specifically about one hotel chain. So we know that the hospitality sector accounts for 1.75 million workers, of whom 24% are non-British nationals. If you... it's just a massive figures. If you compare that with the UK workforce, the non-British nationals would account for 16%, so much higher. If we then look at the London hotel sector, I can't give you an exact figure. No one's particularly interested at this point to supply us with that. But we would estimate we're going into 60 or 70% non-British nationals within a hotel, and specifically within the subcontracted housekeeping, which is the site of the hyper-exploitation of workers, and that's what I'll be describing. So the UK hotel sector, dominated by global hotel chains, all of which who have an obligation under OECD guidelines to ensure fair and equal treatment of migrant workers. Parent companies within this sector operate a very confusing and complex business model based on a mixture of franchised and directly managed companies. They operate what they themselves call an asset-light model, which means that they don't own the hotels, they manage the hotels. And this is their way of distancing themselves from that exploitation. 5 of these chains, the Intercontinental Hotel Group, or IHG, Hilton, Carlson, Accor and Melia, are signatories to something called the UN Global Compact. Everyone's nodding, I don't need to explain. So within this sector, the housekeeping department accounts for 65% of a hotel profits. 65% of profits are made by the housekeeping companies. And yet that is the area that is always outsourced to the lowest bidder, minimum wage and below. What that does is it creates an environment of exploitation, particularly when in housekeeping you would invoice the hotel per room, not per hour worked. Okay, so there you then get the productivity levels have to be maintained, and they're maintained systematically through bullying and coercion. And I will give you examples of that. So we in Unite have raised this regularly with the Low Pay Commission. We given submissions to the Director of Labour Market Enforcement, and we've advocated for sectoral bargaining and an extension of the licensing of the Gang Masters Licensing Authority to cover hotel subcontractors. So we would say that to operate in this environment, you should be licensed, because the room for exploitation is so severe, the consequence is so severe. So IHG, back to them. They have a vendor code of conduct which should apply to their contractors. So we have, through union activity, a recognition agreement with a company called Service, who have a contract with an IHG hotel, the Crown Plaza City in Blackfriars. This accounts for 35 hotel workers. That's the extent of that agreement. They put in bids based on the minimum wage, so what is laughingly called the national living wage, and they put in a bid taking into account the London living wage. Now, IHG had made a promise to the Olympic Committee in 2012 that they would pay the London living wage to its workforce in order to win the bid. They've never paid it. And when they took on Service, they didn't take on the London living wage, they took on the national minimum wage. Trade union activity under this recognition agreement is a dangerous business for a worker. To join Unite puts them in the way of bullying, disciplinaries, overmanagement, and ultimately either being pushed out through spurious disciplinaries and you just leave, or just bullying. And that bullying is severe, and it will lead people to just leave the company. What we now have is a lack of ethnic diversity within the workforce, and that shifts as migration patterns shift, and what that currently looks like is an almost entirely Romanian workforce, almost entirely made up of women, and young women, well actually, age isn't quite so easy to categorise, but most of those women workers will not speak English. And yet the head housekeeper will be Romanian and they will speak English. And it is not possible for the company, Service, or for IHG to directly communicate with the workforce. So it will all go through the head housekeeper. And that's where the exploitation comes in, because work is not allocated fairly. It's allocated, first of all, you come into the company through word of mouth and through very unorthodox channels leading to exploitation and people trafficking. It moves into that area. And if you want to continue working at the exploitative levels, maybe 20 rooms, 25 rooms a day, if you don't do that, you won't get a shift the following week. I'm going to give you, I will finish on this, I'm going to give you an example from our hotel workers branch. So this is, I'm going to read it as it was told to us by the trade union member who went in to represent workers. I went to Holiday Inn Heathrow where the allegation was made by 2 Polish room attendants. The allegation was that Holiday Inn Heathrow, the brand owned by IHG, had told its agencies that they would only get paid for for the number of rooms cleaned and not the hours worked. In this hotel, we proved that the 2 Polish women were only paid £2.76 per hour, instead of the national minimum wage at that point was set at £5.73. So they were paid £2.76, not £5.73. During their 3 days induction training, where they worked for 22.5 hours, they earned a total of £18 each, gross pay of 80p an hour. And all this was fully documented for the 5 weeks that the 2 women worked. And those are the kind of cases, they're not isolated, that we regularly deal with and represent workers on in Unite. I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Going forward, after Colin, then the judges can have their questions. And the questions, I'm sorry that you will not be able to have your questions, but maybe during the break you can ask the questions to the people who gave evidence. So.
Thank you. On January the 1st, 2014,
A 28-year-old migrant worker gave birth